For generations, people believed they already knew the story of the Chihuahua. Some insisted it came from Europe. Others claimed its ancestors arrived from Asia. There were even strange theories suggesting this tiny dog wasn't related to ancient American dogs at all. For more than a century, nobody could prove who was right. Then, something remarkable happened. Scientists stopped looking through history books and started looking inside the Chihuahua itself. Its DNA revealed a story that had been hidden for thousands of years, and what they discovered completely changed how researchers view one of the world's smallest dog breeds.
Because the Chihuahua isn't simply a tiny companion dog. It may be carrying one of the oldest surviving family lines of dogs in the Americas. But here's where the mystery becomes even stranger. One group of researchers found that modern Chihuahuas still preserve a strong genetic connection to ancient dogs that lived in Mexico long before Europeans arrived. Years later, another scientific study appeared to say almost the opposite. How could both studies be correct? How could the same breed seem both deeply ancient and mostly modern at the same time? We'll answer that question. But first, we have to travel back thousands of years, long before cities, long before kingdoms, long before anyone had ever heard the name Chihuahua.
Imagine standing in ancient Mesoamerica. The air is warm. Large temples rise above crowded marketplaces. Farmers, merchants, and priests move through the streets, while weaving quietly between them is a small dog, unlike any living in Europe or Asia. It isn't a fashion accessory, it isn't a lapdog, and it certainly isn't treated as a joke. This little dog has a purpose. People believe it protects families, travels beside them, and according to ancient beliefs, even accompanies them after death. The ancestor of today's Chihuahua lived in a world completely different from our own. Yet, despite thousands of years of change, some traces of that ancient animal may still exist inside the Chihuahua sleeping on your couch today. That's what makes this story so incredible. Because while civilizations disappeared, wars were fought, and entire cultures were lost, one tiny dog managed to survive. Not unchanged, but not completely erased either. If you've ever owned a Chihuahua, you've probably noticed something unusual. They're incredibly alert. They form deep bonds with one person. They're fearless, despite their size. And many owners say they seem surprisingly expressive, almost as if they're constantly trying to communicate. Some of those behaviors aren't just personality. They could be echoes of thousands of years of selective breeding. The Chihuahua may be tiny, but its history is enormous. And understanding that history starts with answering one important question. Where did these dogs actually come from?
For decades, the answer depended on who you asked. Some experts believed the breed had foreign origins. Others argued it descended from ancient Mexican dogs. Without genetic evidence, nobody could settle the debate. Then, DNA sequencing changed everything. Instead of relying only on artwork, historical records, and archaeological discoveries, scientists compared the Chihuahua's genetic code with ancient dog remains recovered from archaeological sites across the Americas. For the first time, history could be tested instead of guessed, and the results surprised almost everyone. Before we look at what those DNA studies revealed, we first need to meet the ancient dog that many researchers believe started this incredible story. The dog that existed long before the Chihuahua had a name, long before anyone called these little dogs Chihuahuas, there was another breed that quietly lived alongside the civilizations of ancient Mexico. Today, historians know it as the Techichi. Unlike the energetic Chihuahua we know today, the Techichi was believed to be slightly larger, heavier, and much calmer. Historical descriptions and archaeological discoveries suggest these dogs were valued companions, not because they were cute, but because they held deep cultural and spiritual importance. Imagine living nearly 1,000 years ago. There are no cities filled with cars, no electricity, no modern homes. Instead, towering stone temples dominate the landscape. Marketplaces buzz with activity, and among the crowds walks a small, confident dog that everyone immediately recognizes. This wasn't an ordinary animal. It belonged to a civilization that believed dogs were far more than companions. For many ancient peoples of Mesoamerica, dogs represented loyalty, protection,
and guidance. Some were believed to help guide human souls after death, making them symbols of companionship that extended beyond a person's lifetime. Whether every legend is historically accurate is still debated, but one thing is certain: these little dags were important enough to appear in artwork, pottery, carvings, and burial sites that have survived for centuries, and that's a huge clue.
Because civilizations don't usually create art celebrating animals they consider unimportant. The Techichi clearly mattered, but then everything changed. A civilization disappears, and so does its little dog. History has a way of erasing almost everything. Empires rise, empires fall, languages disappear, traditions are forgotten, and when European explorers arrived in the Americas, the world changed forever. New diseases spread, new cultures replaced old ones. European dogs arrived alongside settlers and gradually mixed with local populations. For generations, many researchers assumed this was the end of the story. If ancient Mexican dogs had existed, surely they had disappeared. Surely their bloodlines had been completely replaced. For a long time, that seemed like the most reasonable explanation. But science had one advantage history didn't. DNA doesn't care about opinions. DNA remembers. The discovery that changed everything. Fast forward hundreds of years, scientists began extracting DNA from ancient dog remains recovered at archaeological sites across the Americas. This wasn't guesswork anymore. Every tiny fragment of genetic material was like another page from a history book that had been locked away for centuries. Researchers compared those ancient genetic signatures with the DNA of modern dog breeds: golden retrievers, German shepherds, poodles. Many breeds showed little connection to those ancient American dogs. Then they looked at the Chihuahua, and suddenly something unexpected appeared. Hidden inside this tiny dog was genetic evidence pointing back to ancient American ancestors. Not folklore, not legend, actual biological evidence. For the first time, scientists realized that the Chihuahua wasn't simply named after a Mexican state. It carried part of the genetic legacy of dogs that had lived in the Americas long before European contact. It was one of the strongest surviving links anyone had found. But just when researchers thought they had solved the mystery, another study complicated everything. One scientific paper suggested modern Chihuahuas had preserved a remarkably ancient maternal lineage. Another found that only a small portion of their overall DNA came from those same ancient dogs. At first glance, it looked like someone had to be wrong, but the truth was much more fascinating than that. The answer wasn't hidden in the numbers, it was hidden in what those numbers were actually measuring. The DNA mystery that confused scientists. Imagine trying to learn the history of your entire family. Now imagine that someone only looked at your mother's side of the family tree. They would discover one story. But if another person looked at every branch of your family, your mother's side, your father's side, and generations of relatives, they might tell a very different story. That's exactly what happened with the Chihuahua. One group of scientists focused on a special type of DNA that is passed only from mother to puppy. This genetic line changes very slowly, making it an incredible tool for tracing ancient ancestry over thousands of years. The results were astonishing. That maternal line pointed directly back to ancient dogs that lived in the Americas long before European explorers arrived. It was like finding an unbroken family photograph stretching back through history. But another team of researchers examined the Chihuahua's entire genetic blueprint. Instead of looking at one family line, they looked at everything. That full picture showed centuries of mixing with dogs brought from Europe after colonization. At first, those results sounded like a contradiction, but they weren't. Imagine pouring 1 cup of ancient paint into a bucket and then adding dozens of cups of new paint over hundreds of years. Most of the bucket changes color, but a tiny drop of the original paint is still there. That's what happened to the Chihuahua. Its complete genome reflects hundreds of years of change, yet one ancient maternal line survived the journey through time. 2 different windows, the same incredible story. And that story became even more remarkable when scientists made another discovery years later. A genetic signature that was supposed to be gone forever. For decades, researchers believed one particular maternal genetic signature had disappeared forever. It had been found in ancient dogs. Then, nothing. No modern dogs seemed to carry it. Scientists assumed that lineage had gone extinct hundreds of years ago. But while studying modern dogs, researchers noticed something they weren't expecting. One Chihuahua carried that same ancient genetic signature. Think about how extraordinary that is. Entire civilizations vanished. Ancient cities crumbled. Countless native dog populations disappeared. Yet one tiny dog was still carrying a genetic thread connecting it to an ancient world.
It's almost like discovering that a single tree in your backyard came from a forest everyone believed had been destroyed centuries ago. That doesn't mean today's Chihuahua is identical to its ancient ancestors. Far from it. Modern Chihuahuas have changed through selective breeding. They've become smaller, their heads are rounder, their personalities have evolved alongside humans. But deep inside, a small piece of that ancient history still remains. And once you realize that, some of their unusual behaviors begin to make a little more sense. Why are Chihuahuas so small? People often joke that Chihuahuas look fragile. Some even wonder how a dog this tiny could possibly descend from animals that survived thousands of years. The answer is simple. The earliest ancestors of the Chihuahua weren't nearly as small as many modern Chihuahuas. Over centuries, humans selectively bred the smallest dogs generation after generation. Each new generation became a little lighter, a little shorter, a little more compact. Eventually, the Chihuahua became the smallest recognized dog breed in the world. Its size wasn't created overnight. It was shaped slowly across hundreds of years.
And while that tiny body made the breed famous, it also brought challenges. Smaller dogs lose body heat much faster than larger breeds. That's one reason many Chihuahuas constantly seek warm blankets, sunny spots, or your lap. Many owners think their Chihuahua is simply spoiled. In reality, they're doing exactly what small dogs have needed to do for generations. Keeping warm isn't just comfortable. For them, it's instinct. The same instinct that has helped tiny dogs survive for centuries. And their size isn't the only ancient trait people often misunderstand. There's another behavior almost every Chihuahua owner has seen: the shaking. And surprisingly, it isn't always caused by fear.
Why your Chihuahua still acts like an ancient dog. Have you ever noticed that your Chihuahua seems to be watching everything, even while relaxing? Their ears move at the smallest sound, and they're often the first dog to notice someone approaching the house. That's not an accident. For thousands of years, small dogs survived by staying alert. Quick reactions were often the difference between life and death. While today's Chihuahua spends most of its time indoors, that instinct never disappeared. The same is true for the deep bond they form with one person. Many owners wonder why their Chihuahua follows them everywhere, but seems less interested in everyone else. Part of that behavior comes from generations of breeding for close human companionship. A strong attachment helped these little dogs stay safe, and today, it often shows up as incredible loyalty. But here's something even more fascinating. Although modern Chihuahuas have changed dramatically over the centuries, scientists have found that they still carry genetic traces linking them to ancient American dogs. They're not living fossils frozen in time. They're living descendants of a very old story.
More than just the world's smallest dog. For years, people laughed at Chihuahuas. They're just tiny dogs. They're nervous. They're handbag pets. But their DNA tells a completely different story. Behind those tiny paws is a history that stretches back thousands of years. They survived changing civilizations. They survived the arrival of European dogs. And despite centuries of crossbreeding, they still carry a genetic connection to their ancient ancestors. Very few breeds can claim a history like that. The next time you look at your Chihuahua sleeping beside you, remember this. You're not just looking at one of the smallest dogs in the world. You're looking at a breed whose ancestors walked beside some of the earliest civilizations in the Americas. A breed that survived thousands of years of history. A breed whose story was hidden until science finally uncovered it. And maybe that's the biggest surprise of all. Sometimes the smallest dogs carry the biggest stories. If you enjoyed discovering this incredible piece of Chihuahua history, you'll love the exclusive videos and behind-the-scenes content available for our channel members. And if you want even more fascinating Chihuahua facts, training tips, and stories that don't make it into our videos, don't forget to subscribe to our free newsletter. The link is in the description. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.